Hello, I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. The Paralympics are finally over in Rio de Janeiro, and China has excelled with the highest number of medals won, 239 in all, including 107 golds, 43 more golds than the runner-up Great Britain, as well as 92 more medals in total than the UK. But how important to international sporting event is the Paralympics? Do they have any real clout in international sporting events? And just how important are the Paralympics to disabled people themselves? With me in the studio, I'm happy to be joined here by Dong Jun and Teng Jimeng. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Li fighting hard. Li of China will take it just ahead of Daniel Diaz.
It was the fourth consecutive time China has dominated the medal standings at the Summer Paralympics since Athens in 2004. With a total of 107 gold medals this year, China has become only the third country to win 100 or more gold medals in a single edition of the Paralympic Games. It was also the largest Paralympic team China has ever assembled. The 308 Chinese athletes, who competed in 17 out of the 22 sports, performed especially well in swimming, track and field, shooting, ping pong and weightlifting. Zhang Haidi, head of the Chinese delegation, hailed the Chinese athletes' outstanding performances as a special inspiration for the vast number of others challenged by disabilities.
Our athletes showed the hope of our country and the hopes of our 85 million brothers and sisters with disabilities back in China. We are deeply touched by their performance so far. You can clearly feel their passion and fighting spirit. With their efforts, China did very well in many new areas, including wheelchair racing and para-canoeing. I'm really looking forward to the Beijing Winter Paralympics. We have made a comprehensive plan to promote winter events, and we're now concentrating on forming the various national teams.
More than 4,300 athletes from 161 countries and regions joined the 11 days competition on the court and track and in the pool. They've inspired the world with their performances. 4 visually impaired Paralympians turned in blazing times in the men's 1500-metre track and field final, and they beat the best effort of the gold medal winner from the earlier Olympics. Former Formula One driver Alex Zanardi didn't give up his career as an athlete after losing both legs in a motorsport crash. He won 2 gold medals at London 2012, and this time in Rio he finished first in the H5 road time trial on the eve of the 15-year anniversary of when he lost his legs. The saddest news came from the cycle racing event. The Iranian cyclist Bahman Gulbanajad died after being involved in an accident during a race that has triggered a rethink on game safety and athletes' health.
Gentlemen, I think everyone would agree that the closing ceremony did live up to the expectations of many people. Now, looking back over the entire Rio Paralympics, what were the main highlights for you?
Well, I think, Rio sustained their mobility to carry out their promises to the world and remind the world that the promise is not only about hosting the mainstream Olympics, but you have to carry on, although you are facing, difficulties and tough challenges. We all know the city and the country, what was going on with the country, but they sustained their promises and finally fulfill the promise.
A lot of political turbulence did occur in the city of Christ, but what do you think of the main highlights?
Well, for me, there are many, many emotional sides to this very Olympics. For example, the courage, tears, the high performances on the part of the Paralympic athletes, as well as the controversy. I mean, the hosting nation as well, is also caught in this very whirlwind of controversy. The president was eventually ousted, with a new president being booed even at the end of this very Olympic Games. But once again, I'm very much touched by this very Brazilian athlete who actually walked on in this very brainstorm, even though she fell. with the assistance of the walking stick, but then she struggled up and walked on in the rain, and being really the flagship, being the symbol of this very particular group of people. I think
the host city did have a torrential rain. Was it a tearful farewell to, I'm not sure whether to the impeached president or to all the participants who enjoyed high moments?
That also reminded me of the closing ceremony for the Olympics, the Rio Olympics, a few weeks ago. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, the seasonal, thing for the city and for South America. Yeah, but people accept that and still embrace the partying, moments. Yeah.
It could be a tearful or tears of the heaven for the Iranian cyclist who died dramatically in the race. There are a lot of touching moments indeed. A total of 4,342 athletes from 61 countries took part in 22 sports in Rio, with a total of 2,642 medals up for grabs, including 2 new events, canoe, kayak and triathlon. Which of the events do you think attracted the biggest followings?
Well, for me personally, it's an individual interest because, the blind Chinese soccer team, men's soccer team, entered into the semifinals, and that surprised, almost the entire population of soccer fans back home here in China. Most of them were not aware that they actually had a team to be proud of in the world, to be able to win a medal and to beat some of the better known powerhouses in soccer in the world. And so soccer is not only is not a sport in China to be blamed all the time, but you do have a team that can do really good and really well in the world.
I mean, I agree. I think that's kind of a little bit of digression. I never think that kayak or this triathlon can be a popular sort of sports items on the Paralympics. I think actually, once again, I agree with Paul. I think, for example, soccer and ping pong, and even this 100-meter dash. I mean, this Chinese girl, right, even excelled this former Australian gold medal holder, Isis Holt. I mean, that was a big surprise. I think all our eyes are on this sort of sporting items instead of a kayak.
Of course, the Chinese swimmers contributed the biggest, bulk of gold medals.
The medals, yes.
Yeah, among all sports.
That was indeed a huge splash in the pool. China as a country fared much better than anyone had dared hope for, and the final medal tally put them way ahead of their nearest rivals, the United Kingdom. Back in 2007, the huge China Disability Sports Training Center was opened in Beijing. Do you think this itself has contributed immensely to the huge success in Rio de Janeiro this time around?
Yeah, that's really impressive. I was so impressed, and I asked myself a lot of questions, about these results. And that also reminded me of some moments that some Chinese state leaders, when they addressed the crowd or the entire delegation of the team, when they came back from Rio, and they were so careful to utter both the Olympics and the Paralympics, because just a couple of decades ago, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, were worried about some newly joined countries into the Olympic movement to, from now and then to forget about the Paralympics. But the Chinese leaders didn't. They tried even harder. They were even more careful than many mass media to utter Paralympics together with the Olympics.
Right.
That demonstrates the importance
and the
that
vision,
China attaches to the welfare of the disabled people, and give them the opportunity and the large number of participants, both the participation by the athletes from China and also the great success they achieved in the games demonstrated how the big improvement and the situation they actually enjoy here in China, because that will cost budget for the central or federal government by sending them to Rio, and China fulfill the promises not only to the international community but to their own people who are so eager to participate in.
But I'm afraid behind the budget stands the political will
Right.
And of course, our respect for all people on the equal footing, including, of course, the disabled. Don't forget, we have a sizable population of up to 85 million disabled people in China.
Well, absolutely. That sizable figure speaks for itself. I think a large pool of talents and athletes from which that we can, in a sense, pick our ideal candidates. China invests in this very pool of huge number of athletes. At the same time, I think China, like Paul said, the Chinese leaders can be very visionary, think really long ahead. And we do invest them, not just invest in them on short-term basis, but long-term basis. Look at our training facilities. Look at this huge training facilities. It's a long-term one. And at the same time, the vision, the idea of equality among all people are also the same, and are also very important in promoting this special group of people, to the international stage. At the same time, individual numbers are one thing. Individuals are more important. Anyway, it's that very individual, up to that very individual to compete for that nation. So I also respect these individuals, in addition to this very state sponsorship, state assistance, the state provision of staff. But these great individuals, look at all these Paralympic athletes, their courage, their pain, their agony, and all the stuff that they have actually endured are so very much special and inspirational.
And I don't think it's fair to take the numbers for granted that, okay, this is a logical outcome of, the large base and the large number of participants. But also, because the categories are quite complicated, you have to register in the right category to compete against similar people fairly. And also, the great success in the Olympics would demonstrate that you have achieved smaller successes over the years. You have to keep participating in smaller international competitions that also represent long-term investment, not only in the Olympics, but in other international competitions and training and practices. And also the coaches buy regular, mainstream athletes for these disabled people. And that's a huge investment in this cause.
I wonder, when we are making comments on the high performances of those disabled athletes from around the world, I wonder if you guys could imagine that some of those did have to go through moments of extreme agony before and after their experiences with their Paralympics. For example, one guy that the BBC interviewed said, upon achieving the huge success in track and field, he wanted to commit suicide. And he made it open, made the secret open. He said he could not tolerate a single moment of the agony. He wanted to use euthanasia to end his own life. Could you imagine the unthinkable sufferings that these guys have to go through on a daily basis? And what kind of opportunities does the stadium or the Paralympics in Rio provide them? Is it silver lining, or is a catalyst for them to bring their life to an end in a tragic way? This story of the BBC has indeed left me deeply puzzled, and it's a moment of sadness for me when I was listening to the BBC radio program.
I wish I could, because I'm not a disabled person, but I can't imagine exactly how they feel, how hard and agonizing it actually feels. But also by watching a CCTV report during the games, it reflects the emotional feeling of an athlete who narrowly missed the medal 4 years ago and wanted to give up, but she couldn't find anything else to prove herself, and she was so obsessed about between the choices of getting back to the sport she used to practice or of trying to find something else. Because she's a special person, she's a disabled person, there are not many other choices for her to demonstrate her potential ability again. And then she persuaded herself, and also thanks to friends and coaches, support and assistance for her to get back to the sport. And finally she won the medal. And that story was so moving, at least for me.
Right. One of the great upsets, I think, at this very Paralympics is Zhang Xiaotong, one of the gold medal honors of China. I mean, she actually reported the kind of agony that she actually, endured during training. I mean, she actually lost her leg and both legs, and she has to sit on the wheelchair, and in a sense, it was so very painful every single time, every morning. Think about a person who is disabled and had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and train for 6 hours a day. There's sort of self-motivation, self-discipline, and courage, and the kind of a motivation. It's not just for one person, I think. There's a lot of the kind of a noble kind of motives out there involved. And at the same time, I think that the state sponsorship, the investment put into it, and that inspired these young athletes or disabled athletes.
Very touching stories indeed. You are watching Dialogue with Dongjun and Teng Qimeng. We're discussing the closing ceremony of the Rio Paralympics, as well as some of the very touching moments. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. For the normal people who are very healthy, it might be very, very difficult to think of both the psychological and the physical adversity and challenges that these disabled guys have to face every day. Let me tell you one story that I personally went through at least 12 or 13 years ago, just a few years after I took over the job as host of Dialogue. One girl who had been confined to the wheelchair for years wrote a letter and said, why did you refuse to invite people with disability to come to your studio and tell their stories, the stories about their unusual life? And with that in my mind, I did invite a former interpreter for the former chairman of the All China Federation of the Disabled, Deng Pufang. He was a successful entrepreneur because he was able to, run his own factory in one of the satellite counties of Beijing. I thought it was a good story. I brought him to the studio. But when I repeatedly asked him the same question as to how could you, a disabled person, be so successful? And he was very nervous. He was obsessively nervous. And I invited him twice to come back to the studio, but the discussion was very unsuccessful. I was very much embarrassed. What do you think, what kind of story did this personal experience of mine tell you?
Well, yeah, I think they're very conscious about being treated equally, and instead of being deemed as someone special. And it just reminds me of in the art world that when you plan to curate an art show or art exhibition for female artists, many would protest against the idea because they don't think the concept is actually valid. They don't want to be treated
as
differently, as female from other mainstream or male artists.
You mean we got to be very careful with the politically correct wording?
Exactly, yes. But when you have such a platform as the Paralympics, it would directly mean that the audience would watch people with disabilities to compete against one another, and that's inevitable. But yeah, maybe it's a very skillful technique or a professional job to ask questions carefully and make sure that they will speak out and answer the questions by opening their mind and their heart to the question. That's tough.
Right, right. But if I may, let's take this Rio Paralympics. A former Canadian Paralympic athlete also recalled the fact that Rio has done a very good job in terms of making things accessible to disabled people. Instead of reminding them, oh, you're disabled. No, you're not. You are first an athlete, and then you are a disabled person. And so that kind of switch of perception, to me, is very important, right? You mustn't see these people as disabled people. You see them first as athlete, and then see the human side of them, right, as people. And so in Rio, I think that the idea, the perception switch was so very successful. You see them as athletes, they compete, and you forget about, oh, they are disabled people, right? And even though we are aware that this is Paralympics, but then once again, they compete. The spirit they carried on was the spirit of the mainstream Olympics.
And the rules are similar to the mainstream Olympics, and fairly speaking, the runners, the swimmers, and the ball players are actually better
Well,
than
this
most
Alger-
ordinary
right.
people.
This
you know.
Algerian guy, actually, I mean, in box, I think this is Bog or something. I mean, he actually compete together with 3 of his twin brothers, and they ran this 100 on track field. It was 1,500 meters. They run faster than the athletes in the mainstream Olympics, and so it was almost like a joke that this time around these the mainstream Olympic athletes run slower.
That 2 unsuccessful interviews that I conducted with the interpreter of Mr. Deng Pufang was only end of the beginning. I ended up doing a 3rd interview with a young American guy called Zhang Shibai, who run a very successful radio English teaching program because he graduated from either Yale or Columbia. I could not remember clearly. After it took place 13 years ago. He said, in his account in the interview, that from the moment he got up every morning, he had been assisted all the way along the journey from his home to the university. Everybody was ready to help, to say nothing of the facilities that were designed in a very human way for the disabled people. And obviously China is a young student in this particular regard to help the disabled. Let's come back to examine why Russia was barred from taking part this year owing to the doping scandals. I mean, this whole Russian delegation of the disabled for the Paralympics was barred from the participation.
It's a very highly controversial issue, but you know, without siding with any party, I think all parties would agree that without Russia, it's a very regrettable situation that the Paralympics has to face for the very first time in many decades, and that's not something, you know, really pleasant for nobody.
What do you think of the Russian reprisals, the hiking?
Well, yeah, you can't say that you know, hackers are international citizens. I have to say they are private citizens. They don't have to belong. They don't have to be hired by any authority or government. You know, even if the government would accept the reality and also host another, you know, event back home for those who are prevented from being, you know, allowed to compete in Rio. But some other organizations, including the Hacker Society, may do something out of their own will. And
my question is the findings of the hackers.
Well, yeah, they are really explosive, and I think what they find and what they disclosed on the internet is far beyond many, even professional media's imagination. I don't think I have ever read or seen any previous report about the so-called TUE or you know, therapeutic use exemptions. Such a policy or such a preferential policy, I've never heard of it. I think it's a big challenge for WADA and also for the IOC and IAAF and among many other international organizations.
How many athletes from Western countries knew the exception rule?
We need to find out, and if responsible media will keep continuing you know, covering this event.
How could China have no idea about this?
I've never heard of such an issue in China. How many among
Is this an issue? Is
more
this
than
a serious
400
issue of
Chinese
transparency for WADA?
Well, I think it's a big issue now. And WADA needs to answer the question, and also the IOC needs to answer the question. Actually, how many countries in total? How, you know, without disclosing the so-called privacies
how many
or, you know, the disorders. You know, how many from different countries actually have enjoyed the TUEs?
Right.
Well, the spirit of Olympics has always been politicized from perhaps day one of its birth. Let's look at this moment of controversy. The Belarusian team defied the Paralympic chiefs and entered the stadium for the opening ceremony waving a Russian flag in apparent support of their controversially banned neighbors. Russian athletes, meanwhile, staged their own opening ceremony back in Moscow for their own games, including some 270 athletes. And now President Putin promised to the Russian delegates, I would do an equally beautiful competition for you guys who failed to participate in the real games. What do you think of this, this allegation about the controversies?
Well, to me, I think once again, I mean, sports or sports meet, I mean, in peacetime, basically is war. I mean, this is called peacetime war. And so those legally admitted athletes are now permitted to fight and fight on the court legally. And now there could be also illegal, groups and perhaps being excluded from that very legal courts. Now, the question is, who has the final say? The West or that IOC? Who represents IOC? And is IOC fully representative of all the entities or stakeholders? I don't know. Theoretically, all people, all nations are stakeholders in this very global
spectators of any competitions would all be called stakeholders in a sense.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's especially true in this digital age.
Yeah.
When millions or even tens of millions of netizens from China are participating, cheering for their athletes, or criticizing their athletes, or quarreling with their counterparts from other countries, of course they are stakeholders.
Yes, indeed. We do have rights and to be entitled to transparency. In the opening ceremony, former gold medalist Marcia Massa bravely picked herself up after falling in torrential rain. Jimeng said that briefly in your comments. Now, looking back, what are the inspirations you have drawn from the Paralympics? Because we are normal, we look healthy. But in terms of the bravery and ability to challenge the limits of our human capability, what can we learn?
I think it's a great idea for the IOC. It's a right thing for them to always insist that any bidding city have to promise that they will include both mainstream and the Paralympics if they want to host the greatest event on this planet. I think, to some extent, the Paralympic athletes or the disabled people would demonstrate even better than the normal athletes the spirit of the Olympic Games, the Olympic movement. They challenge their limit because their limit is very, visible.
Yeah.
And they can challenge, they know that people are aware of their difficulties. They can prove that they can really become stronger, faster,
right.
And better.
So they're testing their own physical limits, and each attempt at trying to, in a sense, to test their physical or mental limits is our daily lesson. Our able-bodied people, is our lesson, and to encourage us, right, to do.
But
better.
by the end of this,
don't forget, they have almost zero opportunity to win sponsorship. Corporate sponsorship. They have to invest themselves, and also by enjoying, funding from the state.
Exactly, they have a zero return for any serious commercials. I'm sorry, both of you failed to find my question itself flawed, because I asked the question in such a way as if we have a sense of arrogance in front of the disabled athletes, because I said, we look healthy, we look normal. And they would ask, do you really look healthy?
No.
With this question open for the next discussion, I'll say goodbye to you guys. Thank you for being with us. Until next time.